everybody, and welcome to Cryptocurrencies, the Future of Digital Money show at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com. My name is Michelle Holliday. Today, we are welcoming for the first time Mr. Jeff Berwick. Jeff is the founder of the Dollar Vigilante, the CEO of TDV Media, and the host of the very popular video podcast, Anarchast. Jeff is also a prominent speaker at many of the world's freedom, investment, and gold conferences, including his own called Anarchapulco. Jeff is regularly featured in the mainstream media, including CNBC, Bloomberg, and Fox Business. Jeff's background in financial markets dates all the way back to the founding of Canada's largest financial website called stockhouse.com in 1994. We want to take a moment to share with everyone that our founder of Portfolio Wealth Global, Tom Beck, is currently in Central America and South America studying the many opportunities which will help United States-based citizens to take advantage of the emerging markets, which are very attractive compared to the expensive market in the United States equities. Make sure to go to portfolio.com, portfoliowealthglobal.com, that is, /top5. That's the number 5, to research Tom's 5 big altcoins for 2018. One of them has already doubled since the beginning of the year. Jeff, we are so honored to welcome you to the show. Now, I know, of course, that you are a major investor in Bitcoin.
Yeah, you can call me that. I've been in Bitcoin since 2011 when it was around $3. Unfortunately, I didn't buy any at that moment in time, but I did find out about it. And I did receive my first Bitcoin actually at $3 from Trace Mayer, who's actually quite well known in the Bitcoin world. He was one of the first people who told me about it and got me into it. And I've been actually covering it ever since. I said pretty much from the moment I understood what it was, I said this is going to change the game. This is a paradigm shift in money and banking, and so far been proven fairly correct on that, with it now around, it's hit $20,000 recently and now just down below $10,000. But I think we're still very early in the game, interestingly enough. It's kind of interesting for me, since I've basically been covering this since 2011, that so many people are interested in it now, about 7 years later. But in many ways, it is still quite early still in terms of the cryptocurrencies.
Now, Jeff, I know you have an extensive background in finances and financial business. And could you tell everyone, for our first question, a little bit about your own background and what led you into cryptocurrencies? What started this journey for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. I grew up in Canada, and I was a very cold part of Canada is -40 quite often. And I ended up moving to Vancouver, and I ended up working at a bank, and I decided I was interested in the stock market. So I did all the government courses to become a stockbroker, which are all completely useless, of course, and teaches you mostly wrong information. And then after a while, the internet actually came out, and I'd been a computer nerd since I was about 12 years old in about 1981 or 82. And I was a hacker programmer all the way back then. And when the internet first came out, I said, this changes everything. Very much like how I felt when I found out about Bitcoin. I said, this changes everything. I'm dropping everything. I'm doing this. And that's what I did in 1994. And I quit my job at the bank and started something called stockhouse.com. And there was no way to even get financial information on stocks in Canada at the time. And we began doing that, and we actually ended up expanding into about 8 different countries across the world by 1999, including Hong Kong and Singapore and Australia and England and many others. We had about 250 people working for us. And then the tech bubble all collapsed, and it was all almost worthless over again. And I actually, the first thing that happened was someone gave me a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, who's become a good friend now. And it really explained what happened and how these bubbles are created. And I ended up traveling the world for numerous years after that, because I wanted to actually see the world, because I knew what we were seeing on the television programming wasn't exactly the real view of what's actually going on in the world. And I wanted to see that. So I ended up going to about 100 countries. I tried to sail around the world. And then I realized how it all worked after, I guess, about 5 or 10 years of just studying everything I could on everything to do with the markets, finance, economics, libertarian thought, freedom, all those sorts of things. And it was around 2010 that I decided to start the Dollar Vigilante, because I decided no one was telling people about how this whole system works. So I started that then. And interestingly enough, when I started, it was the tagline, and still is, surviving and prospering during and after the dollar collapse. And I just looked at the numbers and just did the math, and it was quite obvious that the US dollar, and in fact all fiat currencies, would collapse quite soon. And I said by the end of the decade, and that was 2010. So I made a semi-prediction there that by 2020, we will see all fiat currencies collapse. And I think actually we're very on track for that at the moment. And it was around 2010, maybe 2011, someone asked me, well, if all these currencies are going to collapse, what will take their place? And I responded, I don't know, but I'm sure the market will come up with something. And then very quickly after that, I found out about Bitcoin, and I was so happy. I said, look, it already has. And of course, Bitcoin was started in 2009, but not many people really knew about it till at least 2010 or 11. Of course, some people still don't know about it, but it was this entire path I've been on from the beginning is really led me to doing these sorts of things now, because of what I found out when I was doing stockhouse.com is the stock markets are mostly all rigged in one way or another, and the central banks are doing all the things to destroy economies and all those sorts of things. So it kind of led me to doing this now and telling people how things kind of work and actually making large profits while we're doing it. So it's been quite a bit of fun.
Well, my next question to you is, when did you actually become an anarchist? Can you actually pinpoint what ignited that perception in the world?
Well, the word anarchy means no rulers, and it means that you don't want to be enslaved. So I would say all humans are born anarchists. I don't know of any babies that are born and immediately want to be enslaved or enslave other people. That seems to happen after all their vaccines and the government indoctrination camps and all that, and all of a sudden they want to be more enslaved and things like that. So I think we're all born that way. I think we get it sort of taken out of us because of the systems and the way that they're set up in the world today, that a lot of people think this is just normal, to have the entire human race enslaved by governments and have all the money system basically monopolized by central banks, which are a tenet of communism, which are essentially central planning of the money system. So if you don't like communism, you shouldn't like central banking. And
right.
So I think all people generally are anarchists. They get it beaten out of them, and everything on the television programming. It's called programming for a reason. It literally is meant to brainwash, and it's meant to put out propaganda on behalf of the people who generally control it. And they're the same people who control the governments and the central banks. So when I first found, I actually didn't know what the word anarchy really meant until it was around 2002. So after my internet company basically collapsed and I was in the process of selling it, I met Doug Casey, and he asked me a number of questions, and he said, you know what you are, don't you? And I said, no, what am I? And he said, you're an anarchist. And I thought he meant those people who have bombs and break windows and stuff. He's like, no, that's not what it means. That's what the media and the government tells you because they don't want anyone to know it. It's a totally peaceful philosophy that just people should not be forced by violence to do things they don't want. And that, of course, is what government really is all about. So that was, I guess I was always an anarchist. I actually mostly conducted my life as an anarchist, but I didn't actually realize I was one until I was about in my early 30s. And as I mentioned, when I was traveling the world, reading about everything to do with economics and finance and central banking and everything, I also was reading up on libertarian philosophy and really realized that that was also a major key to how we can create a better world. Because in my opinion, almost all the major problems in the world today are caused by the belief in government and central banks. So one big key part of that I've been so happy about is that cryptocurrencies are the first real direct threat to central banking in centuries, if ever. And well, at least centuries at the very least. And if we can take away the control of the money system and give that power back to the people, which would be cryptocurrencies or even gold and silver, but in this digital age, it's quite a bit easier just to transfer around digits on the internet than to be transporting gold all over the place. And of course, now there's gold-backed cryptocurrencies and all that, which I think will do very well. But we'll see what happens. But I think that's generally where it's headed, and that's really encompasses a lot of the things that I do.
Now, Jeff, shifting gears just a little bit, do you think that the United States can perpetually continue to grow its national debt? I am pretty sure I know the answer to that, but I'd like you to expound on it just a little bit.
Yeah, I think any person with any common sense, and most people don't have a lot of common sense anymore, or an ability to think rationally because they're not taught that in the government indoctrination camps, which they call schools, which they put kids into as prisons for 12 years, and they go into college and they get indoctrinated even more for 4 or 8 more years. And if they take economics, they're not going to learn anything about economics. They're going to learn about communist-style, centrally planned economics. Sorry, I forgot your question. My mind starts racing. About
probably, yeah, when I mentioned the national debt.
Oh, national debt, yes. So that was a big focus of mine when we started the Dollar Vigilante, was just look at the debt. And interestingly enough, it was only 10 years ago, before I even started the Dollar Vigilante, when Barack drone bomber got into office, the national debt of the U.S. government was about $8 or $9 trillion. We're now over $20 trillion. It's doubled in the last 10 years. That is absolute Banana Republic style numbers. And the central bank, the Federal Reserve, has kept interest rates basically at or near 0% now for 10 years. This is complete end of the game system, just trying to keep it going a little while longer. Because if they even raise the interest rates, you can just do the math in your head. Maybe not if you went to government indoctrination camps, but with a calculator, just take $20 trillion and put 5% in there. I'm thinking here about $1 trillion per year in interest payments alone the U.S. government would have to pay, which is almost all their entire budget. So this game's over. They know it's over. The people in control have been planning this. It's always planned collapses. They actually do this on purpose. Even the 1929 Great Depression, that was on purpose. This is all documented now. The central bank printed up a lot of money, very similar to now. And then they cut off the money supply, which is quite similar to now. If you look at the money supply, it's actually going down in terms of growth. So we might be in another sort of 1929 situation right now. And what they did in 1929 is they bought up all the stocks, then they printed all the money, and then they sold all the stocks at the height in 1929. When everything collapsed, they bought everything at pennies on the dollar while everyone else was broke. They do this over and over. This happens quite often, almost every 7 years, quite a bit. And we're overdue for another one right now. And if you look at the numbers right now, there's actually no way out of this one. In the past, they could raise interest rates. For example, the 1980s, sort of almost near hyperinflation that got into at the end of the 1970s and 1980s, this whole system could have ended at that point. But what happened was Paul Volcker of the Federal Reserve decided, okay, let's allow the interest rate to go to its natural market level, which is where it always should be, but they manipulate it to favor their friends and cronies and do all sorts of deals that really enrich them and impoverish everyone else. So when they allowed that to happen, what happened was in 1980, the interest rate went to about 18%. And that was where the market said, I think that's about where it should be right now, given all this money printing. We don't have trust in the U.S. dollar. So you can just do the math. I can't do it in my head. I went through 12 years of indoctrination as well. But if we went to 18% right now, that'd be $3.8 trillion per year in interest payments alone, which is bigger than the actual budget of all the money that's extorted from U.S. tax slaves every year.
Ah, interesting. So you think everything is pretty much contrived and orchestrated down through hundreds of years, if not thousands?
Well, not everything, obviously, but when you look at generally the political system, the financial system, the monetary system,
that's what
yes, quite a bit. Very orchestrated. Started with the Rothschilds a few hundred years ago. They said, I care not who makes the laws as long as I control the money. They realized that the real power that could be had in the world would be to control the money. And they began central banking. And they've been doing this now for hundreds of years, and they've grown and grown and grown. And now they basically control every government in the world because they can destroy an economy anywhere very easily because they control the money. If they just withdraw the money supply, everything crashes. So they go to whatever country it is and say, if you don't do this for us or do that, then we will destroy your economy. It was written about in the Economic Hitman. This is very well-known information if you're paying attention. So yeah, this is what they do. Some people are starting to wake up to it, but I think it was John Maynard Keynes who said that not one man in a million understands inflation. And that was a long time ago. I think it's closer to maybe 10 or 100 in a million now, maybe 1,000 thanks to the internet. But it's still your average person doesn't understand it at all. And they don't understand that's how everything can be controlled, manipulated, and destroyed eventually. And everyone can be impoverished while not even the 1%, it's literally the 0.000001% get massively enriched to the tune of trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And this has been going on for a long time now. And if you look at which countries may not yet have a Rothschild-controlled central bank, there's not too many. There's North Korea, there's Iraq, there's Afghanistan, there was Libya, but then after they attacked Libya, the U.S. Department of Defense and the Pentagon, they installed a central bank the very next day. They weren't even trying to hide it. Syria doesn't have a Rothschild central bank. I don't know if Iran doesn't have a Rothschild central bank. I don't know if this is anyone's noticing a pattern here. Basically, if you are under attack by the U.S. military terrorist organization, it's because you don't have a central bank that's controlled by the Rothschilds.
It's very scary. Shifting gears just a little bit back to cryptocurrency. In the cryptocurrency world, do you see any altcoins which have a large 100 million to 300 million market cap, which may still be wiped away by competition very soon?
Well, it's interesting you asked 100 million to 300 million, because I'm just scrolling through the list here. There's not many under 300 million anymore. That's how much a lot of these have risen in the last year. So no, I don't know of any 100 to 300 million dollar altcoins, but I would say that we are in very interesting times right now when it comes to the cryptocurrencies. Even Bitcoin has some issues and has some problems. And then, of course, there's Bitcoin Cash, which is trying to fix some of those problems. It also could have issues. Even Ethereum could have issues. And then you go down the list.
Really?
And pretty much when you get outside of the top 10 or 20 at the very least, you get into some very speculative, very who knows if it'll work or not sort of altcoins. But some of them will work very well. I'm just looking at the list right now. For example, number 29 at the moment is $500 million is Steam. I think that one has excellent potential. It's a social media backed, basically on the blockchain. So it sort of is like Facebook or like other things like that, but on the blockchain. So it can't have censorship and things like that, which is a big issue on most of those platforms today. Looking at a few of the other ones that are in that sort of range, there's not too many. Like a lot of people sort of assume that I know about like 50 altcoins that are going to go up at 10,000%. They're not that easy to find. One of the ones that I will say that I'm a big fan of, a massive fan of, is EOS, and it's currently at about a $4 billion market cap. It is doing so many things that are paradigm shifting, that are very similar to Ethereum, but much better. That could be a huge one in the next year or so, in my opinion. As far as the rest, it's really a crapshoot. And you could have done very well in the last year just buying a little bit of every altcoin in the top 200 list, because they've all gone up so much. But it won't always last like that. I think we're actually going to go through some major crashes. I already predicted what's going on right now, and I think it could go quite a bit lower. But then that'll be another buying opportunity, of course, because this isn't going away. These are all very new. If you think about it, there wasn't really even any ICOs until about a year ago. And now the ICO market's bigger than Wall Street. They raise more money on ICOs than IPOs. That's how fast this is changing. But because of that and so much money coming in, that there's a lot of very sketchy, we already saw BitConnect already crash and burn, and there's numerous others like those. So you have to be very careful. But in the long run, no, there's absolutely going to be numerous cryptos that will come from nowhere and shock the world. And which ones those are, it's going to be the tricky part. But that's basically what we do at the Dollar Vigilante, and I've been doing it since 2011 and have picked so many of these. We picked Ethereum at $2. I think we picked Dash, which I also like a lot, at around $10. It's $200 now. So there's tons of opportunity, but you have to really know what you're doing.
Jeff, speaking of the stock market, are you invested in any Buffett-style stocks? Many people believe that the stock market is rigged, but if this strategy is clearly working, why not implement it?
Well, it was working in the past. I don't think it's going to work much longer. In fact, Warren Buffett hasn't even kept up with the S&P in terms of keeping up with those sort of things. And the S&P is doing 10% a year or something along those lines. And they're going to have a massive crash very soon, in my opinion. I think this is the year probably for it. So as an investor, just investing in things that have been working in the past is not always the best approach, especially when you realize most of these things are based on money printing. Most of the money printing that's been going on by the Federal Reserve, most of it flows into things like the stock market and things like bonds. Bonds have been in 40 or 50 year a bull market now. There's no. It's funny because they call T-bills risk-free assets, but it really is return-free risk. You get no return. It's paying, what is it, 0.5%, and the U.S. dollar and the entire U.S. government could go bankrupt and just disappear in the next couple of years. So it's incredibly risky times for your average person. If you're your average person, you've just got some mutual funds and you're hoping that your pension's going to be there. It's probably not even there right now. Almost all pension funds are underwater. They're even the socialist insecurity, or what they call social security, is absolutely bankrupt. The government even says so, and all their projections of when it's actually just going to stop paying out anything keep coming down. It used to be 30 years from now, 20 years from now. I think the latest one, and this is from like the government itself, was like, yeah, 10 years from now, it's pretty much over. And they always overestimate it, usually by a factor of 3, 4, or 5. So if you look at the numbers, it's over. If you have your money in a bank, well, the FDIC is bankrupt too. Actually, everything's bankrupt. This is what happens when you have 0% interest rates for 10 years. And when you have governments going into massive amounts of debt, everything is underwater. Everything is bankrupt. And in that way, it's really important to wake up and protect yourself. If all you're thinking about, if you watch CNBC and you just buy mutual funds and you don't have any sort of access to precious metals, gold, silver, you haven't even looked at cryptocurrencies or other hard assets as well. That's the real key, is hard assets. Things that even if the entire economy implodes, and it will implode at some point, and if everything gets wiped out, if you have a hard asset like a farm, you still have that farm. It's not like Janet Yellen or Ben Bernanke can destroy that completely too. They can destroy a lot of things, but they can't destroy the actual earth itself. Hopefully not yet anyway. And so, for your average person who doesn't know these things, yeah, they're going to get massively wiped out in this collapse. And a lot of people think that they're going to be getting their pension in 5 or 10 years or 20 years. Forget about 20, forget about 5. It's over. The whole game's over. It's just a matter of how it collapses now.
Wow. Now, Jeff, speaking of gold, do you think that gold proponents sometimes ascribe too much power to the deep state and to central powers?
Well, gold bugs are kind of interesting because they've been sort of what cryptocurrency people are doing now, sort of saying central banks are horrible and governments are horrible. They've been saying that for a long time, and I 100% agree with them. As far as the deep state, that's a interesting thing. That's sort of a meme going around right now. Some people are into actually think Donald Trump is like a good person or something, which is obviously not. They say, well, it's a deep state, so the deep state's controlling everything. And in that sense, actually, I agree. What you see, Barack drone bomber or George Bush or Bill Clinton or any of these criminals, Donald Trump, they don't control anything. They are teleprompter readers, same as Janet Yellen, same as Ben Bernanke, same as all of them. They are put up there just to put on television programming and talk to, make people think that there's something really, they have a chance in all this. No, they don't have any chance whatsoever. So yeah, I don't know exactly what they refer to as the deep state, but I refer to something similar, and it's basically the people who control the central banks and the government. And there's many different names for that. So you can call it the deep state if you want. But if you're asking if what I've heard about the deep state from gold bugs, if it's not that bad, no, it's far worse. It's far, far worse than most people even know. Everything is absolutely controlled. Most things that people think they believe are not true whatsoever. In fact, the CIA director in the 1980s, and numerous people heard him say this in the West Wing of the White House, said, our objective will be complete when everything that Americans believe is not true. And that is generally the case. Look at 9/11. They think some guys in caves in Afghanistan did that. No. Look at every war. Oh, we had to go to Vietnam and kill like 1 million people because I don't even know what the reason was. It was so stupid of a reason, but it's not the reason they said. They actually sunk their own ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. Every single thing is all planned and contrived. Even what's going on today with North Korea. You have people in the U.S. actually worried about Lil Kim in North Korea. It's like he's controlled by the same people. They put these things up on your television programming to keep you worried so you don't pay attention how enslaved you are.
Jeff, going back to cryptocurrencies just for a moment, can you explain why they work? In other words, why are they needed?
Needed, that's an interesting question because nothing's really needed, right? Air isn't needed unless you really want to live and breathe, right? But as far as what are the importance of cryptocurrencies? To me, it's because we have a world today that is completely enslaved. Governments have so much power. It's unbelievable. If you talk to someone 100 years ago and you tell them what's going on today, they wouldn't believe it. 100 years ago, you didn't even need a passport to travel. Now, good luck even getting a passport and getting visas and all these sort of things. If you talk to the founding fathers, which is such a cult, but if you talk to them in the U.S. and you told them what was going on today, they wouldn't believe it. They would just be like, this is like the exact opposite of what we wanted to do. And it's totally true. So as far as, you have these governments, they've done a really good job. The people, you call them globalists or whatever you want to call them, the people have been doing this for hundreds of years and just keep going and keep going. And they meet at places like Bilderberg, which I've gone to 3 times to try to expose them and stuff like this. They just continue on putting all their people into all the positions of power. And this goes all the way down to even like police, chief of police in almost every U.S. city is involved with them. They're unbelievably good at what they do. And it's actually not that hard because they have access to trillions of dollars. They have the printing press. So they just press a button and they're like, yeah, pay this guy this much and we own him now. And then they'll go out and they'll send other guys around and make sure they get some dirt on him. So all this sort of stuff. They do this over and over and over until they basically got most of the world under governments, and they've actually convinced people, they're really smart, that they need the government and that they want the government. And democracy that's a good thing, that you can like check a box and you can use violence against other people and you vote for this guy or vote for that guy. This is absolutely absurd, this entire structure. And then they got the central banks. So when you have a world that's so controlled by them, by the government, and they extort everyone, in the U.S., your average person extorted 30 to 50% of everything they make. I don't know, slavery, they say, is 100% of everything you make, it's taken away. I don't know what percent it's not slavery exactly, but I'd say 0%. Anything above that is some form of slavery. If someone's holding a gun to your head and saying, you owe me money, and you didn't agree to it, that's slavery. And they've got that everywhere now. And then they've got the central banks that print up all the money, and they control that, and they can destroy countries so easily at any time they want. And they do it for fun. It's like a big game of Risk for them. They just go, let's blow this up today. George Soros and all these guys, they'll do all that kind of stuff. So in this kind of world where you have this, one of the only ways that we can get out of it is to stop using their money. This is where the whole dollar vigilante came from originally. I said, because back in the 1980s, when central banks and governments got too out of control, there was things called bond vigilantes. And actually, George Soros is one of them. He used to be kind of a good guy, but the ring of power is very corrupting. So I was looking at it in 2010. I said, we can't even have bond vigilantes anymore because they control the interest rates completely. They control the money supply completely. They control all the government. So you can't just sell bonds because there's no point. They can just buy them all up. It doesn't matter anymore. So in 2010, I said, what we need now are dollar vigilantes, people who just sell their dollars and stop using them, because that's the only way to stop this tyranny that they do. And because of that, that's what the importance of cryptocurrencies. If cryptocurrencies were not decentralized, if they were in an office somewhere with the CEO would be in jail right now, and the office would be shut down by any government. This is just what they do, but they can't shut it down. So this is the first chance in human history for us to take the power of money back into our own hands. And if we do, it will make central banks go away, which means all wars end. All wars are funded by central banks. And most governments will have to downsize minimum 80 or 90% because they're mostly funded by inflation. And when you have that, we will have a world of peace and prosperity like we've never known it, if we can get to that point. So that's the importance of cryptocurrencies. So a lot of people say, oh, it's just, I buy it just because it might go up. It's like, no, this is way more important. This is the most important thing in history, in my opinion. The last one was the internet. Before that, we couldn't get out this information. Before that, you wouldn't have had this show. I wouldn't have had this show. You wouldn't know who I was. We couldn't have got this information out there. Thanks to the internet, we can. And now, thanks to cryptocurrencies, we can take the power of money and banking back into our own hands. We can even store money in our own brain, which is incredibly powerful. And if people understand that power and start to use it, we will have a brand new world that no one will believe. It will be so much more peaceful and prosperous. If we don't, and we continue down this road, we will have a world of tyranny where the one world government, which is what they're working towards, has a one world central bank and a one world currency, which is digital, which they control, which they can tax. Every single transaction that humans make, we will have tyranny and enslavement on Earth like we've never known it. Those are the stakes with cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, we're in a huge time in history, probably the only time this has ever happened in our world that we have a chance to really do this. Now, shifting to bonds, you mentioned them. What happens to bonds prices as inflation and interest rates rise? The founder of our company, Portfolio Wealth Global, Tom Beck, sees a bigger bust than 2008 coming when this happens. And he has written about it in something called Yield Armageddon. It's a free report for our audience to be able to download because of the importance of this subject. Everyone can find it at portfoliowealthglobal.com/bonds to see exactly what to do with your own bonds portfolio. But Jeff, what are your thoughts about this very gloomy prediction? Tom truly sees that this will be the biggest bust that we have ever seen.
I don't think it's gloomy enough. He said it'll be worse than 2008. It'll be complete carnage. There'll be nothing left after the bond bubble collapses. And we've had this interest rates at 0% for so long now, and they've actually even gone into negative interest rates, which are so beyond the imagination. I never would have dreamt that anyone would ever fall for negative interest rates. You now have people buying 50-year bonds in France or Switzerland at minus 0.5% interest rate. So you're paying them to loan the money, and then you might get it back in 50 years, which is the Swiss franc won't exist. The euro won't exist. Well, actually, the Swiss franc doesn't even barely exist. The US dollar won't exist. They won't even exist in 5 years. So we're at the end of a crazy, crazy system. All bonds absolutely will be all wiped away, all bonds. And that's why I say when we talk about pension funds, they're all going to be gone too. The stock market will be mostly gone. It'll go down so much, people won't believe it. Now, the only thing that could happen is they just continue to print more and more money until we go into hyperinflation in all the world's major currencies, which would be the euro, the yen, and the US dollar, and the British pound, things like that. If so, yeah, we could see the Dow Jones go to 1 million, but a Big Mac at that moment in time will cost $100,000. So when you look at it in nominal terms, yeah, they could go up. But when you're talking about real terms, no, all these things are over. It's done. If you haven't escaped yet, if you haven't woken up yet, you are waiting till the last minute. It might not be this year. It might not be next year. We're talking no more than a couple of years. We're not talking decades. We're talking, and it could literally be this year. It really could. This is how close we are to the edge. And people don't even realize it. That's how good they have their television programming. Everyone thinks everything's fine. This is so close to everything being over that most people won't believe it. I don't even know how books will be written about this afterwards. I don't know what's going to be left after everything's gone. But if everyone switches now and realizes this and gets into things like gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies, the transition after the massive collapse will be a lot easier. If you just look at people in Greece, when I said the Greek banks were going to close, no one in Greece apparently listened to me. And then the Greek banks all closed about 2 years ago, and everyone lined up outside the banks after they closed. It's like, you're doing it wrong. You're supposed to do that before they close. Right. For whatever reason, people just wait too long. And, there's that old saying, it's better to be a couple years early than a second too late when it comes to these sort of things. So for people out there who haven't started to at least prepare, and that would be, as I mentioned, precious metals, hard assets, and cryptocurrencies and things like that. If you haven't yet, you have no idea how close you are to waiting till the final second. And once this all starts to happen, it will happen super fast. It will happen weeks, maybe months, but it's not going to be years once it all starts to happen. And it'll happen so fast that most people just will have no idea. And of course, the government, the mainstream media will come out and say it was because of some terrorists or this or that, or they'll cause a bomb to go off somewhere and say that's what caused it. That's what they do every time, but it's not what caused it. This is all written in the cards. It's completely obvious if you know what's going on that this is going to collapse. And if you prepare for it, it would be very interesting, because what happens afterwards if you are prepared? This is sort of generational wealth level sort of stuff. If you have most of your assets in hard assets, precious metals, and cryptocurrencies right now, and the bond market collapses, the stock market collapses, the fiat currencies go away, you will be wealthy compared to everyone else to a factor of 1,000. In fact, you'd have to start being careful, because most people will be wiped out, and you'll be sitting there and they know you've got a bunch of Bitcoin. I'd definitely get a lot of metal. I'd get gold, silver, and lead, and I'd also move out of major cities during that collapse. It's not going to be pretty, but if you can get through it all, and good luck to everyone, if you can, you could change your life dramatically just by being prepared for this collapse.
Wow. Yeah. Fortunes are made in collapses of civilizations too, just as well as building them, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Our last question to you is, can the United States middle class return to its old glory? Is there a chance of this happening?
No, it's because the money system of the central bank has essentially destroyed the economy, and there's no way to fix this now. What could happen is the U.S. Dollar collapses to zero, and everyone gets into cryptocurrencies and precious metals really quickly. And within a couple of years, if everyone sort of rebuilds, they can do okay. But you can't. There's no way to fix this. Like when people said, "Oh, Donald Trump's going to fix this," no one can fix it. This whole thing is so indebted, so done. You have to let it collapse and then rebuild, essentially. And so in terms of, can the middle class, well, you look at where is the middle class? They're almost all gone. I think most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck now. And this has been on purpose by the central banks, by the taxation, the extortion of the government, by all the rules and regulations. Regulations destroy economies, has made it so you just can't, it's very difficult to get ahead in the U.S. nowadays. In fact, I tell a lot of people, just get out of there. It's not going to get better. It's going to get a lot worse. And there's so much more opportunity in other places now than in the U.S. because it's a lot freer. The U.S. is now one of the least free countries in the world. And the reason the U.S. was quite good and did very well in the 19th century and even did fairly well in the 20th century is because it had a lot of freedom. If you just look at any list of any country list and you just say, what are the top 10 countries that have a lot of freedom? Hong Kong, Singapore, all rich countries, and you look at the bottom 10, which ones have the least freedom? North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. It's obvious that freedom creates prosperity, and the U.S. is becoming less and less and less free. You just look at what's going on today, and there's no way to salvage it. I'm sorry. There's just no way to salvage it. It's going to have to collapse first before there's salvaging, and I'd be very happy to see that it rebuilds very quickly, because if there's one thing I can say about your average American who I've met is there's a lot of entrepreneurial-minded people, a lot of people who like to work and who like to build businesses and companies and stuff. So the good news is if we can get through this collapse, it could be rebuilt very quickly. And if there's no government or central bank after that, it could become Hong Kong in the U.S. in a couple of years. It happens that fast. If you look at once countries decide to allow freedom, Hong Kong used to be a fishing village, and now look at it. Singapore, I think 30, 40, 50 years ago was like no one there, was a fishing village. Look at Dubai, same thing. It was just in the desert. There was nothing there. They said, hey, let's not have too much taxes and not really have the central bank do too much, and boom, skyscrapers everywhere. That's what happened. So the bad news is, no, there's absolutely no way that this will be salvaged. The good news is, if you're smart and if the people around you are kind of smart, it could be rebuilt very quickly. But that's why I do what I do. I want to tell everyone before the collapse, because if you have at least some assets and precious metals and cryptocurrencies, you will be so much more able to rebuild after the collapse than your average person. And we need a lot of those people out there to help rebuild once it happens, because it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
Well, Jeff, this has been an amazing interview. Please tell everyone how they can follow your work.
Sure. If you're interested in the Dollar Vigilante, just go to dollarvigilante.com. We're also on YouTube. You can just find us there. I do a video almost every day. I've been doing this for like 8 years now because, as I mentioned, I want to just make sure I do my best to tell people what's going on before it's too late. I also have, as you mentioned, Anarchast. It's a freedom show. It's also on YouTube. And we also have the world's largest freedom voluntarist conference, anarchist conference in the world, right here behind me in Acapulco, Mexico, called Acapulco, held every year. We just finished this year with over 1,500 people, and people like Ron Paul and Cynthia McKinney speaking. And next year we're expecting a lot more, so you can check that out as well if you want to come down to a much freer country, the much safer Mexico, Acapulco, Mexico, much safer than most places in the U.S. And despite what the CIA and the mainstream media says, so you can check out all that stuff, or just Google me on YouTube and you'll find me.
Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure.
Mr. Jeff Berwick, otherwise known as the Dollar Vigilante. Be sure to join and subscribe to Portfolio Wealth Global as we keep bringing you the most amazing interviews with today's financial leaders in the world. For Cryptocurrencies, the Future of Digital Money show, I'm Michelle Holliday at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com.
You've seen the Dollar Vigilante on mainstream media trolling the fake news. and seen Jeff Berwick travel inside places like Venezuela and Cuba to expose the truth about what's happening in those socialist paradises. To get even more, make sure to subscribe to the Dollar Vigilante newsletter to receive 2 full 30-plus page issues from the Dollar Vigilante each month, plus market alerts on precious metals, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and gold mining stocks by going to dollarvigilante.com/subscribe. Click on the link in the notes below or go to dollarvigilante.com/subscribe to find out more.